G'day guys, today we're going to do a coolant flush. So there's plenty of ways to do a coolant flush. The way I'm going to do it is by draining the radiator, filling up with distilled water, then running the engine, letting it circulate, turning the heater on to move the water through the heater core, and then draining again and doing the same thing. So it's a repetitive flush process. When you drain the coolant from the radiator, you're not draining all of the coolant because there's coolant in the heater core and in the engine block. So there is also a drain plug on the engine block, but I don't know where it is and it's a bit of a pain to try and find it. I'm going to be using just some coolant flush. There's directions on the bottle. Each one will be different. For this one, drain your coolant first and then you mix this in with distilled water or clean water, and then you let this run through the system for 15 minutes. And with your heater turned on, it should break apart minerals and contaminants inside the cooling system. And then when we flush it the second time, a lot of that should come out. And I'm going to fill it up again with distilled water. So I use this on the first one. I might do another 2 flushes after that. It depends on the colour of the coolant. I'll take out the reserve tank, drain it, and then wash it out in the sink just to clean it out a little bit. There are other ways you can do it. You can take your radiator out and flush it with a hose. You can drain your cylinder block and your radiator as well, but you'll need to find the cylinder block drain plug. I've got distilled water, coolant. I'm using premix. You've got to remember when you're using premix, when you're refilling the cooling system after flushing with distilled water, everything in the cylinder block will be distilled water still. So you won't have 50-50 if you just fill it up once. You kind of need to flush with coolant towards the end to try and get that mix 50-50 through the cylinder block, the reserve tank, the radiator, because we're only draining from the radiator. So I have the car jacked up. That's because I was doing the timing belt. You don't need to have it jacked up. On your radiator, you've got this little white tap here. It is called a petcock. So if you open that, your coolant will drain out straight down. I've already drained it the first time because I did the timing belt and water pump. I'll overlay footage of that being done, but I've already done it. So once you've done it, it's important that you tighten that up hand tight. It's only plastic. Your radiator is along the front here. Here's your reserve tank. So I'm going to take this out and empty it. So looking from underneath the car, this is our reserve tank, and it looks like it just slides up. So it's held in by these clips. So we can push that up, drain it into a container and then wash it out. So on the 1.5 litres, the cylinder block drain plug is here. On the 1.8s, I don't know where it is. What I'm using here is a spill-proof funnel. Basically the idea is you mimic the radiator cap of the car, pressing down on this to stop spillage. It's a little rubber seal. Put this in, fill up with water. This allows us to hold water in here and get all the bubbles out, so we can have more water than we need and let this feed down as the car runs through the cylinder block. And as the heater kicks in and goes through the heat exchange, this will drain. We top this up. Before I get started on this, I'm just going to empty this reservoir. So that just lifts out. I'll drain this and then I'll go rinse it out. So I managed to clean all the sludge out, filled it with hot water, put my hand over there, shook it, and pretty much everything's come out, so I'm happy with that. The engine of the Lancer 1.8, it's roughly 6.5 litres worth of coolant. You won't get 6 litres in straight away because there'll be a lot of air trapped in the system. And while you're doing this, you might want to check that you got no leaks out of your petcock. Because I did the water pump, it will be 6 litres, so I'll use up a fair bit this first time. But each time after that, it will only be draining what's in the radiator, so it won't be full 6 litres going in each time. And we'll do our reservoir tank as well. Now before we fill up too much, we've got to remember to pour this in. So with this one, you drain the cooling system the first time, which I already did with the timing belt. Then you add this with the distilled water. So we've got 1 bottle of distilled in there. Pump through as much air as we can. We'll lift a bit here because we're going to run the car now and this should drain through, so we'll just top it up. Start it up, we'll keep an eye on this, see how low it gets. We've got distilled water in the reservoir, distilled water with the coolant flush additive. Now the instructions on the bottle say to run the car for 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to go on the higher end of that. I'm going to run it for 15 minutes. We'll turn the heat on in the car and we should see some air escape as the coolant goes through the heater core. Alright guys, so I'm just going to pick the revs up, see if we get any more bubbles come through. And we'll just keep an eye on the temperature gauge, make sure it doesn't overheat. Now I'm going to turn the fans on to maximum heat. Just want to make sure your fans get hot inside the car. I let that run for 15 minutes. I have had the car off for half an hour now, so it's nice and cool. You feel these hoses, there's no pressure there, and the hose itself is nice and cool. So everything being cool now, we can go through with another flush. The good thing about this anti-spill funnel kit is I can plug this, lift it, and then I can reuse this. This time we'll see how much the radiator holds, because with the first time a lot of coolant went in because I'd also changed the water pump, so the cylinder block and the radiator were empty. This time we're just draining the radiator. Alright guys, back underneath the car with a drain pan. Now I can reuse this that didn't get sucked in last time. Putting that in there, pulling this plug. So remember before you do this to do up the petcock beneath, which I've already done. The same thing as before, start the car, fans on, heaters on, and you just repeat the process as many times as you want. So just to show you an alternate method, we've got the thermostat in here. This bolt on top is a bleeder bolt. So this time, just to something different, we're going to take this out and we're going to fill this until we have distilled water come out of here, put this in, and then we will fill this. So in theory, that will remove some of the air from the system. There's a 12mm. Oh yeah. So we've got thermostat bleeder bolt out. So with this method, you need to go a bit slower, because otherwise the water will just pour out. Alright, so that appears to be full. Put the bleeder bolt back in and we'll fill up as per normal, start the car, and we'll see if any less air comes out. Now, the final time that you do this up, the torque is only 15 Newton meters, so not very tight. Using the bleeder bolt method, I definitely got less bubbles from squeezing the hoses. It's like a lot of the air's already out of the system, but you have to go a lot slower when you're filling it. Otherwise you get flow back that will overflow through there. I'm not going to run the car for 15 minutes this time. That was the instructions the first time with the coolant flush additive added in. But this time I'm just going until the fans get hot and then maybe add 2 minutes and then I'll switch it off again. Just quickly, that was the second time. There were less bubbles coming out this time. That could be the fact that we went through the bleeder bolt, but it could also be the fact, and I think more likely, that we only drained the radiator. We didn't drain the cylinder block, so there was less air in the system. The heater core had already been bled out somewhat, so there wasn't actually a lot of air to come out that time on the second flush. So I'm going to let this sit for half an hour and then I'll come back. Now next time I'm going to finish off this amount, and then the rest will be coolant. I just want to get rid of the distilled water so I can use this bottle for old coolant so I can go recycle it. Because we need to get the premix coolant through the cylinder block, not just into the radiator. So we don't just want to fill up the radiator at the end with premix, we also want it to be circulated through the cylinder block. For the next one, I'm going to take this reserve tank out and fill this with 50-50 premix, and this is where we start introducing coolant to the system. Alright guys, so here's the coolant tank. I just took the opportunity while it was out to draw black marks around it so I can see the full and low marks better. That's just on low. I'm going to add a tiny bit more. I'll keep it in between the two marks until I've taken it for a test drive, and I'll see how high it sits when it's hot. So I drained the original coolant for the timing belt and water pump job, filled it up with the additive, then I drained it again after running it for 15 minutes through the system. Then I filled up again and now I've drained that. Now I'm not going to go with the bleeder valve anymore. I'm just going to put it through here and let the car work the air out. It just takes too long with the bleeder valve. Alright, so you can see what colour this comes out as. So that's 10 litres flushed out. Now I'm going to add coolant. The same process except we're adding coolant. So the air's still cool inside, it's just heating up now. Alright guys, that's the coolant flush. The last few flushes we did with 50-50 mix because we wanted to cycle that through the cylinder block. So hopefully the whole heating system is now 50-50 mix. If you just do your last top up with 50-50 mix, you will still have water in your cylinder block and possibly your reserve if you haven't changed that out. Do a few flushes with coolant itself, then you know you've got coolant through the whole system. Rinse it out in the tap. In the tap. Get your words out, man.